Welcome to Breaking News. I'll bring for you latest news on today. While 2018 midterm elections officially take place on November 6, plenty of voters will cast their ballots ahead of time thanks to early voting. Early voting laws are supposed to make it easier for people to get to the polls, but like other attempts to expand voting access, they've often become yet another partisan battleground.
Some 37 states, including those that mail ballots to voters, and the District of Columbia now let citizens vote ahead of Election Day. In 1980, approximately 4 million ballots were cast ahead of the election. In 2016, more than 47 million people voted early. The case for early voting, its proponents say, is a simple one. By providing citizens with more options to vote, whether by mail or in person ahead of the election, it makes it easier for them to do so. They can avoid long lines on election day and pick a time that's more convenient for them. After Barack Obama's campaign gained a commanding lead in early voting in 2008, though, some Republican-dominated state legislatures limited early voting for 2012. Efforts to limit early voting are still underway in North Carolina. There have also been other objections, such as that citizens wind up making their choices before they have all the information. With early voting in multiple states already, you're likely to hear more about it in the days and weeks to come. What's happening, what it means, and who it's good for. Early voting can be a misleading indicator of who will actually win the election. But the fight over whether it should be expanded is far more important, part of a broader battle about how easy or difficult it should be to vote in America. Voters are increasingly taking advantage of the ability to cast their ballots before November. In the 2016 election, about one-third of total votes were cast early. Early voting turnout so far in states such as Texas and Florida this year indicates it could be higher in 2018 than in midterm elections past. Obama's campaign emphasized early voting in 2008, which gave him an edge over John McCain. In several states typically important in presidential elections, including Florida, Obama lost among voters who voted on election day but won when early ballots were taken into account. Right after that election, some Republican-controlled state legislatures tried to roll back early voting and otherwise tighten access to the ballot. Florida, Georgia, Ohio, and Tennessee all limited early voting in 2012 compared to 2008, often arguing that the measures were too expensive. Ohio and Nebraska followed suit before the 2016 election. President Donald Trump has also sounded somewhat skeptical of early voting. Trump made false claims of widespread voter fraud in the 2016 election and put together a now disbanded commission to look into it. He tweeted over the weekend that law enforcement and government are watching out for voter fraud during early voting. Cheat at your own peril, he wrote.
A high number of young voters could turn out in the 2018 midterms, according to a new poll from the Harvard University Institute of Politics. The biannual poll released Monday showed that 40% of 18 to 29 years old said that they would definitely vote in 2018 midterm elections, a substantial increase from 2014 and 2010 midterms.
We believe there is a marked increase in youth turnout, unlike anything we have seen in 32 years, said John Dellavaux, director of polling for the Institute of Politics. Young people who identify as Democrats are more likely to say they will definitely vote. 54% of Democrats, 43% of Republicans, and 24% of independents told Harvard researchers they would vote. That's good for Democrats, but there is also evidence that young Republican voters are becoming more enthusiastic as the election nears. With an eye ahead to 2020, the majority of the nearly 2,000 young people Harvard polled also seem to have an intense dislike of President Donald Trump. Just 11% of young Americans said they are sure to vote for Trump, eclipsed by the 59% said they will never vote for him. The big question is whether that anger against Trump will trickle down to the 2018 midterms. Young voters are a notoriously tricky bloc to get to turn now. Older voters are a much more reliable demographic to get to the polls. This dynamic is pronounced during midterm elections with our presidential race in the mix, but that could change in 2018. We have been hearing about potential blue wave. We are here to talk about a youth wave, said Harvard student Teddy Landis, the leader of the Harvard Public Opinion Project.
So far, Republicans are outspacing Democrats in early voting, according to initial data that could change since some states have only opened mail-in voting and haven't started allowing in-person early voting yet. One change that likely won't alter, though, is early voting's continued growth. More people have voted early than in 2016, even though midterm years typically have lower turnout than presidential elections. And this story appears in Breaking News, a news from us on the latest twists and turns around the next election. Subscribe and follow us along with more about Trump administration's policy. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the duration of today's program. Thank you for watching.